Welcome to Happy Homes and Gardens. I'm your host. My name is Daphne Royse. I am a real estate broker, architecture, and interior designer. Uli Maybach is an entrepreneur, philanthropist, and a real estate developer. His grandfather was the designer of the first Mercedes-Benz. Uli is also a brand ambassador for a new generation of achievement. Let's welcome Uli and let him share some insights with us. How are you, Uli?
I'm good, Daphne. Thank you. How are you?
Doing well. Please tell us about yourself.
That's a broad-ended question. I live in San Francisco, and I'm perpetually busy. It seems like we live in this era of technological upheaval and political change that creates all kinds of opportunities. And living here in San Francisco and sort of the Silicon Valley Bay Area, we're really at the nexus of opportunity that I'm sure you feel as well. And I know that many things that happen here radiate around the world and create little islands and little thought bubbles that then also expand and then feed back to us here. So I think that combined with our university system, with the nascent enthusiasm that people have for things, and just the many, many great minds that throng to this area make it a very, very special place to live. I feel very privileged.
Your grandfather was the designer of the first Mercedes-Benz. Tell us something about your grandfather and what he was like.
So that's almost accurate. So Wilhelm Maybach, my great-grandfather, originated the first high-speed internal combustion engine, and then together with his his colleague Gottlieb Daimler, put that engine into the first cycle to create the first motorized motorbike, then the first motor boat by putting that engine into a boat, and then the first modern car in the form of the Mercedes, which was ultimately designed in 1901, which is credited to my great-grandfather Wilhelm Maybach. And what made that the first modern vehicle is that instead of motorizing a carriage, which arguably was done by Carl Benz some years earlier, this was the first vehicle that was actually designed to be an integrated vehicle with an engine. And so it had a type of a steering system and a braking system that was really nascent and archetypical to the first vehicle. So Wilhelm Maybach was an orphan, discovered in an orphanage by Gottlieb Daimler. And then the two men went and worked in the industry at a number of different companies before starting the Daimler Motor Company and what then ultimately became Mercedes and the Daimler AG.
How many people you can see in the car in 1901?
How many people could you seat in it?
Yeah.
Well, I think 4.
Oh, wow.
One of the original vehicles actually had 2 and 2 facing each other. There are still some archival photos around that. The very first one, the Reitwagen, which was a motorcycle, only seated 1, and then I think the first one after that seated 2, and then ultimately it evolved to a 4-seater, and after that to even more. So,
what, people can afford a car at that time?
You know, it's a good question. And again, there are 2 iterations of cars that involve family. One is the Mercedes and the other is the Maybach, put up by the Maybach Motor Works initially around 1919. The second variation was hardly affordable. The first variation was really championed and pioneered by Emil Jelinek, who was a kind of a dilettante businessman who really took Mercedes to task and marketed these cars in the south of France, where he'd become kind of an icon in the car racing world. Naming then, or should I say, because of his market pull, he was able to persuade the Daimler Motor Company to actually name the car Mercedes after his daughter, and really his favorite name too. So at that time, certainly the cars were just for the very elite, and the follow-up version produced by my grandfather were also very expensive vehicles. But I would say the expense was really reflected by the quality of the vehicle more than anything else.
You were born into an automobile family. What a car should be in our modern world.
So I was born into an engineering family. So Maybach always stood for engines first. And then I would say cars and boats and trains and really earth moving power and industrial power generation. It was really power and engines first. And even the Zeppelins were initially powered by Mercedes and Maybach engines. So my thinking is more around mobility. And I'm very efficiency oriented and even more so effectiveness oriented. How can I get from point A to point B most efficiently? And so being here in the Bay Area and being exposed to driverless cars and Waymos and drone helicopters that will soon be able to fly, my perspective is really forward looking to a quiet, fast, efficient, point to point, making especially the last 5 yards super efficient thinking. But at the same time, there must be something in my DNA. When I read about my great grandfather and my grandfather, neither of them ever owned cars themselves. And my great grandfather is known for having enjoyed going for long walks in the mountains and the forests and so forth. And I know my grandfather was of the same ilk. And that's something that's been handed down in my family, that we all really like walking, which I would attribute also my mother's longevity to having reached the ripe age of 98 and really walking almost a mile every day up until the end. So we have an orientation towards mobility.
Will you consider to have a flying car in the future?
Sure. I mean, I think that the drone version of a flying car or a flying mobility is a great idea. We already see these drone shows and these drone swarms made up of really thousands of drones and the amazing things that they're able to do. I think that technology will be adopted in our lifetimes to human transport, very efficient, very effective human transportation modes.
Who designed the iconic logos of a Mercedes-Benz and Maybach? What is the meaning behind the logos?
Well, the three-pointed star is fairly well known. I think that the story goes there was a postcard where Gottlieb Daimler had put a three-pointed star, which was sort of his personal talisman that he put on there. And between him and his kids, they adopted this as sort of a personal figure. And then, of course, it was translated into something corporate. I think with Maybach, MM stands for Maybach Motorenbau, which means Maybach Motor Works, and that was then also equally stylized. The Maybach came into the world during or really formulated much of the early industrial revolution. And I would think on the European side, we had the Italian futurists that also designed these not quite Gotham shapes, but really going into that direction where art was used to translate the rising industry and technology of the time for digestion by society. A little bit like we have art today that helps us understand digital systems more in terms of digital art. And the Maybach Motorenbau logo, I believe, grew out of that art movement at that time that was going on. Keeping in mind also that the streamlined thinking and design thinking was also happening at that time. And streamlining was a big part of Maybach. The Zeppelins that were being designed went into a wind tunnel where they would then put smoke and basically a colored smoke so that they could see how the wind moved around the Zeppelins. This was then also used for the design of the high-speed trains at the time. And I wouldn't be surprised if they used that for the cars. There is actually an iconic Maybach car that is a Stromlinienfahrzeug, meaning it's a streamlined vehicle, which was also designed around this era. So the idea of actually looking at the art movement at this time is a fascinating deep dive to do. And I think we'd learn a lot about how that logo and the posters and the marketing materials came to life at that time in that era.
You are the ambassador for Maybach. What is the key to building a successful business?
You need to keep a step ahead. You need to balance what the market wants and needs and what your creativity comes up with. So there's this synthesis, because I think just purely polling the marketplace may not give you the right answer. I think there needs to be a creative spark that comes up and offers something to the population that they actually didn't know yet existed, or didn't know yet that they needed or wanted. And I think when we study art history, for instance, we see that evolution as well. How new movements in art even get a name because they've come up with a new way, a new perspective, a new point of view on things. And so innovation is a really big deal. And yet I'm going to balance that out by thinking about hard business principles about Henry Ford, and how do you automate something, and how do you take something and replicate it and bring your costs down, and actually bring that product to market in an affordable manner so that there's deep adoption of it. Again, we look at things like the iPhone, which has over time become a cliche almost in terms of how effective that has been in terms of both hitting the notes of what people want, bringing the cost down, and maintaining a high price.
How do you bring costs down and bring a high price? Doesn't make sense to me.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Well, I mean, come on, look at luxury goods. We've now learned through this sort of the political era that we're in, that the margins on luxury goods are remarkably high, and that there's actually no limit to how many can be produced. So scarcity is something that's managed, carefully managed, like a business, right? So it's really the management of this which allows you to set a certain price point and even predict your profits to some extent based on these margins and based on these different components that come into it. I mean, I think it becomes very, very granular, and combining the idea of having a good idea with really effective execution of that good idea is probably the single most important part.
What I hear is innovation, technology, and maybe hardworking.
State of flow, commitment, staying at it, perseverance. Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, while you're at it, why don't we say it also takes a little bit of luck, right?
Of course, that's very important component. You work on both Maybach Foundation and Maybach Family Office. What do you find most challenging in your work?
So right now we're building a small museum Schau depot, as we call it, in the town of Friedrichshafen on the Lake of Constance, which is the town where my grandfather originated his Maybach Motorworks. And putting a small project like that together in a town of less than 100,000 people on a lake in a industrialized area in a very bucolic sort of part of the world, and then working with a name and a brand that has global meaning and radiates globally is challenging, because you have two very, very different audiences. One is the people who have a certain pride of origin around this, all within, say, a 200-kilometer radius. And then you have worldwide customers of a completely different ilk all over the world. And those global customers see the humble origins and the innovation and the hard work and the invention and the entrepreneurship and the history and the archetypical stories that go into this thing. And many wonder, because they just saw a flashy car, or they saw something that was engineered to perfection. And they go, wow, look where that came from. And on the other side of things, the local community who takes that portion of things for granted because it's part of sort of the industrial pantheon of that town and of that area, which also includes ZF, the Zahnradfabrik, Dornier Aircraft Company, the Zeppelin Company. It's really the Zeppelin Company 100 years ago that spawned many, many, many other companies, and that's why it's an industrial area. And the people of the area have great pride in these various industries that really are at the heart, at the core of this idea of quality made in Germany. And for them then to witness what these cars have done, what has grown out of what was really almost an afterthought for Karl Maybach, whose main purpose had been engines for the Zeppelins and then powering the German railway system, and really by accident, building and powering these Maybach cars. For them then to see this multinational effort and respect and admiration of arguably the most luxurious car in the world having come from their small community. So here's what we face. And then we put our efforts in telling this story of DNA expression. And what are the qualities that run through the Maybach story and how are they expressed? And there are many technical features. There are different vehicle models, boats, cars, trains, obviously many car models, power systems, corporate history, mentoring, which runs deeply through the whole DNA story. And I say that because Wilhelm Maybach, as an orphan, was mentored to success. And then his son, Karl Maybach, helped to originate what we call in German the duale Ausbildung, which is a learning and working theory where young people both get a job to get hands-on knowledge, and then they work on the academic side. They go to school on the academic side of things at the same time. And so this program starts often when somebody's 13 years old. They decide not to pursue higher education, and then they go into basically high-level fabrication work or finishing work, where they really learn exactly what they're doing, and then they become masters of it. And that also is at the core of this quality made in Germany idea, and the notion that a German worker can work 35 or 32 hours a week and be more productive than people who are working in other countries for hours longer than that. So that should hopefully answer your question. I know a little roundabout, long-winded, but I filled in all the blanks, right? A lot of interstitial areas filled in.
Is it there's proper training for a 13-year-old want to be in the automobile business? Somebody trained them how to build a car or how to start?
So just as an example, there are two schools that we as a family are affiliated with in Germany, the Karl Maybach Gymnasium, which is sort of a high school. And, there is some technical orientation there, but it's really also a high school. And then that would be in Friedrichshafen. And then there's also a technical university in Heilbronn, which matriculates several thousand students every year. And that is very much of a technical university. And out of those 2,000 students that matriculate every year, though, they are the powerhouse of the automotive industry. They go and work for Audi and Mercedes and Porsche, and I would say primarily the car companies in the Stuttgart area, but also beyond. So it's a very systematic program that feeds into industry, and industry feeds back into it too, in terms of what its needs are, what the cutting edge technologies are. And I go every year. We fund a Maybach Prize at this university, and I get to meet the winning students and meet with the headmaster, who's also generally somebody who's been a titan of industry in their own right and has then decided to come and run the school for some period of time. So it's I can't say enough about how well run and how effective this program is.
What do you think is a part to make a German automobile be a leading industry in the world?
Well, I think that goes back in history. And if we look at the early 1800s, southern Germany, which is much of where the car industry is from in Germany, was a backwater. And in 1815, mind you, not 1915, 1815, there was a regime change. And the new king there in southern Germany and Baden-Württemberg changed a lot of policies and built schools and hospitals and built transportation corridors so that there was more commerce and trade between North and South. There had also been a very bleak weather system caused by the explosion of a volcano at the other part of the world, Tamboro, I think it was called, and a cloud of ash settled just north of the Alps and circled, creating several years of like a non-existent summer, and the crops didn't ripen and people starved. And so this new king came into power and kind of inherited these difficult times, which really brought out, I would say, the best of the southern Germans. And the king, I think it was Kaiser Friedrich, I confused him and his father, hired a man named Steinbeiß, who was kind of the head of the Chamber of Commerce, also very, very brilliant man. And what he did is he really reached out to the brightest young minds in the land and said, you need to go to other countries and learn what's happening there. One of the people he sent away was Gottlieb Daimler, who went to the United Kingdom, among other places, to learn engineering after having gone to school in Germany, bringing those ideas back. It was also happened with BASF and with paint companies and pharmaceutical companies. So really, these tragic beginnings led to a very creative renaissance in Germany. And into that renaissance was born my great-grandfather. And into that renaissance came Gottlieb Daimler, who then, I would say, took Wilhelm Maybach under his wing. There was a 12-year difference. And together they started working and inventing and taking these ideas from really atmospheric gas engines. And really the thing that Wilhelm Maybach did was take a benzene-soaked rag and hold it up to the intake manifold of this engine and seeing it spark to life. In other words, an engine that ran on liquid fuel rather than on gas, and then going on to invent the spray nozzle carburetor and later a honeycomb radiator that kept these cars from overheating. So a lot of inventions that were really built out of this Tüftler thinking, which was like a MacGyver thinking, almost like they would take what they have and often even build their own tools in order to solve problems and come up with solutions. And it's out of this mix that this engine invention came, and then quickly putting that engine into things that needed to be powered. And really the car, the carriage was really one of the very first things. And so that's where this came from in Germany, and they really owned it. They really owned it. So that spark started there and then really grew. If you think about Henry Ford, the Model T, he took that technology and just put it all into that Model A and made this very accessible car out of it. The Germans didn't do that, not until much later with the VW. So I'm not going to claim I'm some kind of an expert on automotive history, but I am an expert on Maybach history. So I can talk to you freely and frequently about that.
Was the first car 1901 burn gasoline?
Yes, benzene. Mm-hmm.
Okay, interesting. Let's go back to museum. What was the most meaningful part for you?
Of the museum, of the Schaudepo that we're building?
Yes.
I like working with a team. I like the idea of really thinking about what these DNA expression markers are of the brand. Why is it important? How does the evolution look from 1850 to today? The idea that there have been some interruptions in there, but the interruptions have been more of a just shifting or pivots almost from designing one kind of an engine to another, a different form of mobility. I mean, today we have a luxury car. 140 years ago, we just had the first spark of a single internal combustion engine with a single cylinder. I think today it's fascinating to see not only the technology that goes into the vehicle, but also the corporate branding work and the jostling for position with the other luxury products, and understanding why people are purchasing these cars, and what it means and what the brand means, and why people embrace it and how it becomes something that really represents success and accomplishment, and in my mind also something of a creator brand. And these are all really, really interesting things, I think, to think about intellectually, aside from the mobility that we get out of it.
Automobiles are an international business, especially luxury brands like Maybach. Do different cultures have a different demand?
For sure, yeah. I just got back from India, where we really officially launched the Mercedes Maybach brand in India, in Jaipur, to a very, very appreciative audience. The Indians have a history of acquiring these cars going back over 100 years to the Maharaja, who really coveted them. So there's a great base there. We were also opening one of our Maybach accessory stores in Bangalore, because the market is very strong there for the eyewear and the leather goods and the accessories that we produce. They're highly appreciated. I think the Indian culture is also one that's very craft oriented. So the Indian culture is known for having beautiful things made for them. And they're really extending that to having an appreciation for certain brands that are also true to the quality in a very authentic way. In other words, you can't sort of fool an Indian person with something that's flashy. It really has to have a coherent story and substance behind it. In the United States, for instance, the story is a little bit different. Even between Los Angeles, Miami, and New York, the way the color combinations that people want their cars, or which models they purchase, and then we go to Asia, where the vehicles tend to be black, and they don't need to be powered to the same extent because they're more an inner city vehicle and chauffeur driven, whereas different markets they may actually be driver driven. I did notice there's also a number of special edition vehicles. There was the Centennial car that came out in a blue and silver, just a gorgeous vehicle. There was a Hot Voiture in 100 item limited edition with sort of a tweed sidewall and inside, and almost a shag rug. Super, super unique and artistic. The Virgil Abloh vehicle, the G-Wagon Landaulet in 100 pieces that were a limited edition that went largely to the Middle East. So I think that every culture has a little different approach to it, and to go one step further on you, the idea of producing these limited editions speaks also to a particular customer group, whether it's psychographic or geographic. Has been also a very, very smart play, and it's also very telling in terms of who purchases these vehicles.
Very interesting. What do you like to do when you're not working?
I'm like my grandfather. I like to go walking in the woods, thinking.
And if you can change one thing in your life, what would it be?
It's a good question, and I do think about that. I travel a fair amount, and I'm very sensitive to transaction costs. I don't like transaction costs. I like to be where I want to get as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So the idea of closing my eyes and thinking my way to some place is the closest that I can do to have a very efficient transfer from here to there. And I think that's why there's also this emphasis not so much on vehicles as on mobility and transportation, and getting from point A to point B in a fast, efficient, low carbon footprint manner that still allows you to shut your eyes and think about things and reflect on things, because those are some of the most precious moments that we have, are the quiet moments where we come up with new ideas and clear out the old ones that we don't need anymore.
Yeah, I have one last question. What do you think about 2035? We have to sell only clean cars. What's your view on that?
You mean here in the United States, or
I think
well,
maybe California.
well, we know that certain car companies actually had set a goal for 2030, and then they changed the goalpost. And I personally don't believe that electric is the cure all end all, because you've got to burn something somewhere. They're burning tires at four corners to come up with electricity to power those cars. And burning tires is a highly polluting thing. So while at the same time it's not as bad, and there's scale involved in installing scrubbers and so forth, by centralizing the power production, there's also massive transmission loss and power going from the power plant to the point of use. So, sure, you can look at the efficiency equation, but once you get done with mining all the lithium out of the ground in the mountains of Bolivia, I'm not so sure that equation is really, so far off from where we are with the internal combustion engine. I do believe it's going to be a combination of a number of things. I also believe that nuclear, solid state nuclear energy, whether we're able to move into a fusion fission area, it's probably just a matter of time at this point. So I think the goalpost will continue to move, and we're going to continue doing the best we can. And like so many other difficult issues, you spend a lot of time muddling through before you get to the end of the tunnel.
Thank you so much, Uli, for your time today. And that was very insightful.
Daphne, thank you so much.